Welcome back to Real Florida Magazine.
Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest today is Chris Patterson, Judge Patterson. At the end of the day, there's only so much money to go around, and I think the county asked for $8 million or thereabouts and ended up actually with 9.2. Is that accurate?
We had contingency plans to try to build for somewhere around 6.2 million. And as the process went on, we were asked to give justifications to the legislature as to if that was a realistic number or if we needed more money. And ultimately, the legislature, in their wisdom, awarded $9.2 million. Again, the only county in the state of Florida that received any courthouse funding last year. It was the only county, based upon a coalition of all the county governments in the state of Florida, that asked for courthouse money. So again, we had folks, Chairman Alan Bush and others, that were working different prongs of the problem to get people to kind of make way for us, let our project come into the forefront and be the true emergency without overselling it. And it was a true emergency and still is, to get the funding that we needed. And I will tell you, I'm probably one of the few people that stayed up on that Friday night as the legislative session was closing, watching Jimmy Petronas in his white suit as they were approving that budget, and the $9.2 million came through. We have much thanks for Senator Gates, Representative Petronas, the entire legislative team, and Governor Scott for all of their input and getting us where we are today. And now the hard part starts. We build a new courthouse.
I think that a lot of people stayed up late that night waiting for the results. And you know, you'd hear something that from someone that, yes, it's a done deal. Somebody else said, oh yeah, we got your back. But at the end of the day, you're dealing with politicians, and so obviously they're going to say what you want to hear. So until we knew that document was signed and that budget was approved, we didn't know for sure. Not long after that, I think the same week that the budget was signed, Governor Scott came to Panama City and made an appearance as part of his jobs initiative in the old Coca-Cola building on 5th Street across from the old Bay County Chamber of Commerce. And we had the fortune to be down there, and we filmed, and I got an opportunity to do an interview with Governor Scott. And they always want to know what you're going to talk about. You know, they're afraid you're going to talk about Dozier School. Or yeah, I said, no. All I want to do is thank him from Washington County. And so they said, okay, well, that's good. And so they graciously allowed me a few minutes, and we did do a short interview. But we did have the opportunity to tell him face to face, thank you for what you've done, because the stroke of a pen, $9.2 million, in his position, you know, he forgot about that the next day probably. But for us, it's a very big deal. And it goes even farther than the safety of our judges. It goes even farther than the convenience of our citizens. That means economic development to our county as well. We've got a new elementary school, Kate Smith, being built right now as well. Between those two projects means a lot of jobs. And both contractors in both of cases, as part of their agreement, said that yes, they would hire local people and not bringing them in from very far away. So these kinds of projects really mean a lot to a small rural county such as Washington. Actually, we're a large county, but we're a relatively poor county. Everybody is concerned when these things happen, either from a fiscal standpoint, and what are you doing spending $9.2 million of my hard-earned state tax money, or from the Historical Society's point of view, oh my goodness, all of that history going away. This is an 83-year-old building. One of the first things that showed up along with the mold and the mildew was chunks of the building literally falling off. Talk a little bit about that structural decay. There was one anecdote in particular about a chunk of concrete falling on the ADA accessible ramp. Talk a little bit about that, and then I want to talk about why this needs to happen in response to those who say, what in the world are you doing? Why can't we just put a few $1,000s and fix this thing?
One of the components that I haven't really touched on yet, and I'm remiss in not doing so, is we did have problems of falling debris from the rooftop. Now, if you'll think back, the summer of 12, the summer of 13, we had some 100-year rains. We were just in terrible trouble with flooding here in the Northwest Florida region. And for whatever reason, that had begun then to decay even more rapidly the facade on the courthouse. And we had a 900-pound block of concrete fall. It fell, fortunately, when we did not have court in session. It fell on the ADA ramp, which completely obliterated the ramp, and we weren't able to use that for 6 months or so. And there was another one that was precariously perched about, again, a similar 900-pound block just ready to go. If one walks on the southeast side of the existing courthouse, you can see some black tarp paper up on the roof. That's where the first one fell. The second one is ready to fall. We have the debris that had fallen from the roof on a pallet, so folks could come by and see just the true danger. It's when those two things happened that the judges decided we needed help, and we went to the Florida Supreme Court. We were blessed to have Chief Justice at the time, Ricky Polston, who's from Graceville, well familiar with Washington County, well familiar with this courthouse, having practiced in this courthouse before. As an attorney, he knew what we were facing, and they became our strongest advocate in Tallahassee. And if we had not had the Supreme Court, who voted in its entirety, a unanimous vote, to support this project when we began our journey with the legislature, we wouldn't be here today. But it wasn't just the Supreme Court. We had to then begin to educate the local folks as to what was going on. Because again, it is a big change, a major change in the landscape of Chipley and Washington County. And so we began our efforts to go to the local civic organizations, such as Kiwanis, for example, the Historical Society, the Garden Club, anybody that would have us. We would be there, and we wanted to talk to and discuss with the folks here in Washington County what was going on and why this change was happening, and just the danger that had been experienced. And so we wanted to bring the citizens into this process, and so we created an advisory council, an advisory committee that would advise the chamber, or the county commission rather, members of the Chamber of Commerce, Historical Society, all interested citizens, always open and welcome to come to these public meetings, which we now have on a regular basis, to chart the course of this new courthouse and to see who would build it, how it would be built, and when it would be ready. And so those were the critical aspects, but at the same time, we did not want to sacrifice the historical significance of this courthouse, the architectural design, and the monuments that are scattered throughout the courthouse yard and inside the courthouse.
And there's even a time capsule just in front of the corner of the courthouse. It's an 83-year-old building, and this part of the world, that's an old building. If you're in the Northeast, you can have a building that's a couple hundred years old and it's still doing well. But here, typically, a building that gets to be that age, it's generally in pretty bad repair. Quality control wasn't quite what it is 83 years ago either. And the way I understand it, one of the big points of contention for the historical people were those big columns in front. Can you address that?
The columns are the signature feature of that courthouse, the 6 columns, and the architectural design. It escapes me the architect's design, but he was from New York City. He had designed courthouses all along the Highway 90 corridor, back as all of these courthouses were springing up to accompany the railroad that was going east-west. This was the final example of that particular architecture, and those 6 columns were that signature of that type of neoclassical type of design. And so it was just incumbent upon all of us to try to do what we could to save those columns or to save the design of those columns. And so one of the things that we set out when we were looking for an architect and ultimately a construction manager was to make sure that that was prominent. One of the safeguards we put into place was we went over to the Florida Secretary of State and made sure that the Historical Division was signing off on everything that we were doing in the design of this new courthouse project, to include incorporating significant features from the old courthouse into the new courthouse. And so that's what we've done as a safeguard to make sure we do preserve the heritage of this courthouse going into the new one.
Going back to those columns, I understand that the general contractor has found that there's inconsistencies in the quality and adhesion of that concrete in those individual columns, and they fear that were they to try to use them, take them down in whole and reuse them, that they just simply wouldn't have the structural integrity that's necessary.
As we've been told, the 6 columns are not load-bearing. And so the overhang of the courthouse is not dependent upon the columns themselves in the existing courthouse that's now condemned. But as we've learned, and of course I am not a builder, have no idea about architectural design, but as we've learned, as those columns were poured, they were poured at different time frames, and the greater consistency of the concrete as they were poured naturally flowed based upon gravity down to the bottom. And so the upper portions of those columns turn out to be less able to be moved, and quite frankly, there is no contractor or subcontractor we can find in North Florida that would move them at an efficient and economical price, and no one would guarantee that they could put them back up in one place. So what we've been told in the same place or the same structure. So what we've been told is, and the contractor, GAC, well-established, well-respected contractor in Northwest Florida, as well as Jim Robertson and JRA Architects, they've told us that for safety reasons we can't keep those columns. So those columns, while they are going to still exist in another form, those 6 columns will still be there in the new courthouse design. The true columns can't be saved. And so what they've proposed is we take the bottoms of those columns and we use those then as the base for light poles in the parking lot area or the entrance area on the front lawn of the new courthouse. And so we will keep the character of that, but for safety reasons, we cannot keep the existing columns. They're just not structurally sound.
You know, a couple of years ago when they took down the old Gulf Power water tower here at the intersection of Main Street and 90, we documented that in video and photo, and what they did is they actually cut the logos which said Gulf Power off of the tank, and those were stacked up on city property to be used in some fashion in a memorial way at somewhere in the future. So it makes sense to maybe cherry pick some of these architectural pieces and, like you say, repurpose them, reuse them in some way.
So the Historical Society then is a critical partner with the development of the new design of the courthouse as well as the ultimate construction. But it is essential that we preserve not only the monuments that are there, the time capsule, any of the plaques, the historical photographs, the historical seal that was inside the courthouse, that we preserve all of those things and reincorporate that back into the new courthouse design and the new courthouse. It's got to be a partnership with all the citizens of Washington County, and so I share the Historical Society's sadness at the passing of the building. I will tell you that the main issue was that the genealogists could no longer have the unfettered access, at least for a time, for the historical records to trace the family histories as well. We've accommodated that by placing those older documents over at the Agriculture Center in a separate facility so that the clerk can make that available as well. Again, we're trying to preserve the legacy of this county, and while we're sad to see the passing of the courthouse in its present form, the new one is going to be a shining example of what we can do as a collective body here.
Judge Perry Wells, very instrumental in the Washington County Historical Society himself, longtime a judge here in Washington County. So their interests are definitely being looked after because he has those connections still, even after all these years. And I know that he's probably paying special attention to what's going on from a historical point of view.
Judge Wells continues to keep us all in line and continues to make sure that we're paying attention to those details as well.
Let's move forward then in time. We've got $9.2 million right now. To the passerby, the only thing that's different is that the doors are locked and it's no longer being used. That's going to change here pretty quickly. The way I understand it, some of those heritage oaks in the front, actually all of the trees are going to have to be taken down to accommodate the new footprint. Talk for a moment about how that footprint is going to change and how the parking is going to change and so forth.
We are days away from demolition beginning. And the plan, as I understand it, is first they will demolish the old jail. There was some mitigation that they needed to do because of the asbestos that was in the old jail. They have done that. That will be the first stage. Now, for about 2 or 3 weeks, then we're going to have some real parking problems over and above what we have now because the sheriff's office and the state attorney and public defender's offices are going to find access restricted because they have to take out into that actual roadway the construction fence. Once the jail is taken down, simultaneous to that, they're going to clear cut everything in the front yard. All the trees go, all the shrubs go, everything must be cleared before they can then bring in the wrecking ball, if you will, to demolish the old courthouse itself. We're expecting the months of April and May to be very busy with regards to the demolition projects. Only after we have a clear site then will the County Commission have a formal groundbreaking, and then we'll begin in earnest the building project, which is right now scheduled to be completed and occupied September, October of 2016. So it's an ambitious building plan, but it starts with the demolition, and so I think folks are going to begin to see a major change days away.
About an 18-month project then, which seems pretty ambitious, as you say. You talked about the records themselves. We're showing a little bit of footage now of that fur of mold and mildew that was actually growing on some of those old documents. Luckily, we had Danny Finch here locally, Finch Fire and Water, who was one of the few in this area licensed and certified to mitigate the mold issue. And so we contracted with his firm, the way I understand it, to clean those documents and then transfer them over to the Ag Center.
He did. The clerk of court at the time, the temporary clerk, Judge, or Harold Bazar rather, did a contract with the Finch Reparation Services or Restoration Services. And they were getting the documents out fast and furious. They were cleaning them as they could. So many of the historical documents from the 1800s had already begun to just absolutely disintegrate as soon as they were hitting fresh air. And so a lot is lost. There is no doubt about that, but much has been saved. And you do have a great heritage from the late 1800s still in existence in those records. Those have been preserved now by Laura Bell, the new clerk of court, and they are being maintained by the clerk's office. So we hope to have all of those then brought back into a special area in the new courthouse, again, where public access would be unfettered.
You mentioned that you yourself, to some extent, and certainly the Chief Justice, has taken a little bit of chin music because of the fact that the state did fund this project, which historically we have not seen. Talk a little bit about that and how unusual that actually is.
It's becoming more apparent that in the 20 judicial circuits around the state of Florida, everyone has problems with mold. Everybody has problems with decaying and old and falling down courthouses, but it's becoming more and more apparent as the Chief Judge, Judge McClellan, has traveled the state, and as the other judges have talked to our colleagues downstate, that this is unheard of, that the state will not fund what is a county obligation. And there, of course, are many counties in the state that have similar problems. We caught the legislature at the right time. We gave them the right type of education, and they were able to fund it for us. But it's not without a price. There are other judicial circuits that are left saying, why not us? And so we are held to a very frugal standard in this process. One of the things that you've heard over and over again, not only from the governor's office, from the Supreme Court and elsewhere, is there will not be a second Taj Mahal built, as there was over in Tallahassee for the Court of Appeal. So we are under those strict orders that we will not build anything that's beyond our means. We will stay in budget, and we will come in on time so that we can accommodate the safety and security of the citizens of Washington County. But again, there is some jealousy around the state that we were fortunate to get this type of legislative assistance so sorely needed by the county. Santa Rosa County is over in this legislative session, the 2015 session, asking for $13.1 million for a courthouse. Key West down in Monroe County, they still are asking for mold mitigation and to build a new courthouse down there. The folks in Broward County have had to self-fund theirs. Of course, theirs is a multi-million-dollar project well beyond our scope. But we're finding that around the state of Florida, it's patchwork. And so we were fortunate at this time to have our legislatures come to our assistance and get us the funding that we need.
Needless to say, there'll be a lot of eyes on this project. I think that there won't be any problem with an oversight committee, ad hoc, multiple of them, I'm sure. We're going to follow the progress of this. I don't even have to ask you. I know that you're going to graciously accept the invitation to come back sometime soon and talk and follow that progress as we go. What I'd like to do, though, is have you stick around and maybe we can talk a little bit about the upcoming Law Day 2015, as well as maybe a little bit what's going on in Northwest Florida. Would you stick around with us?
Happy to do it. Thank you.
Thanks again for being here. I think that you've just kind of painted a picture, maybe a little more comprehensive. Even in our recent coverage, past coverage, we're kind of hit it in spots, but we've sort of followed that progression all the way through, and I think that our viewers have come away with maybe a little bit better comprehensive understanding of the whole process and how it works. So thanks for that. My pleasure. Glad I could help. We're here with Judge Chris Patterson today, friend of the show, a friend of ours personally, an asset and a resource certainly to Northwest Florida. We're fortunate to have him right here. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the upcoming Law Day 2015, as well as maybe what Chris is seeing throughout Northwest Florida, trends and patterns. And it seems that some of our fiscal heartache is lessening a little bit. There are some indicators, but everybody's situation is different. So when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about all of this and more, and we will be right back.